Okay, so I am talking to you guys about a movie that changed my life, and one of the movies that changed my life is the 1988 movie called They Live. I saw this when I was old enough to kind of know that it was weird, but not old enough to realize all of the philosophical implications, which I have found as I've gone through life, that movie has echoed again and again and again my other experiences with movies that are similar to it, and with my experiences with philosophy. So They Live is set in a major city. And by the way, this particular movie is based off of a 1968 short story. And Stephen King did a very similar story, which he swears that he never saw the movie They Live, nor did he read the short story, but it's called The 10 O'Clock People by Stephen King, published or released in 1993. So the timeline of it makes it seem an awful lot like my favorite author might have been influenced by this, but the idea itself is iconic. So it's set in a city, and I won't ruin the movie for you other than to say that it is a great allegory of it's a great allegory in that it mimics Plato's allegory of the cave. So me, in 1988, watching this movie, it fascinated me because it was like the zombie movies I had seen before, in that everything is normal and going along and being sort of pragmatic and day to day, and then all of a sudden someone flips a switch and it's an entirely different world. And it's a world of fear and trauma, and good guys and bad guys are very quickly delineated. And this particular movie, basically a guy gets these glasses, and the glasses are a way for him to see the world as it actually is and not as he thought it would be. And he's being manipulated by everything around him, from billboards to radio to what he thinks is music and it's not actually music, television. In 1988, they really didn't have internet per se the way that we think of internet now. So he would have been influenced by internet, but mainly what it is the idea of how media subconsciously influences us to obey the laws around us. And that's the big idea, is that we are being influenced in a way that we are unaware subconsciously. And the premise of the movie is that it's very similar again to the Stephen King short story, is that there are outsiders that have more power that are causing us to sleep, and we have to like wake up. So my first experience with this movie, I was like, oh my gosh, the world really is like that. And it was like one of those moments that you have as a kid, that's like an epiphany moment. And I started understanding the movies that I'd previously seen as being very different and having philosophical understandings. Like I had seen Night of the Living Dead, and I had seen, I think, Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead, whichever one takes place in the mall. And I realized that those are all commentary on like consumerism and racism and all of those things. And it was like my 11-year-old brain was reeling over the fact that like this thing was taking place, and like this is a movie about this guy, but it's not really about this guy, it's this whole other concept. So at that point I really became a big sort of like philosophical film critic. And then later on when I was in college, I read a lot of philosophy that has to do with this idea of like your day-to-day activity is not the same as like having philosophical epiphanies, Plato's allegory of the cave, the idea of the existential crisis. And it kept coming back to this 1988 movie, They Live. And like all great filmmakers know this movie. Like it's one of those movies that's just like everyone knows it and everyone references it. South Park references the amazing fight scene between the two protagonists. They get down into a serious fight scene, and it's just so good. And the whole movie is like cheeseball 80s, but it's in that really good sort of nostalgic way. And I remember right after watching this movie, maybe it was a couple years later, I saw my favorite zombie movie which is Day of the Dead. It's the one where they're in the bunker, and that has to do with the idea of isolationism. And I remember watching that movie being like, I know what this is about. I understand the philosophy behind this movie. Like, I can totally use literary criticism on this movie. And it was because I had watched the movie They Live, and the message behind it was so obvious that I got it, and it definitely changed my life, and it changed the way that I watch movies and I read books. So I strongly recommend you go watch it. It's a thing. It is definitely a thing. But yeah, check it out.